Good evening to all. I welcome you on to our 140th webinar on behalf of Madras Tax Bar. So today we have amongst us RSC Ponmalar, another young member of our group, who will be taking us through another very interesting topic, the taxability of trademarks. So, this is again a very interesting topic which she has chosen to speak on. So, basically, she will be dividing this topic into four parts mainly. And end of each part, we will have a question answer session, a short 5 to 10 minutes question answer session at the end of each round, uh, each part. So, if there's any question, you can please come forward. If you don't get your chance in these rounds, then at the end of the entire discussion also, we will have our question answer round. So, Arasi, you can start sharing your screen and you can start with your talk.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for joining us today. Over to you, Arasi.
RSC Ponnamalla.
RSC
Hello.
Ponmalar. Yes, sir.
RSC Ponnamalla.
Ponmalar.
Yes, you can start, Arasi.
Yeah. Thank you, Prithvi, for the introduction. I really thank APS for being a very contributing member for this presentation. I thank NTB for giving me this opportunity. So as Prithvi had already explained, I have tried to explain the taxability of trademarks from an indirect tax point of view, deriving principles from the direct taxes. And I have tried to raise four moot questions at the end of each principle that I have chosen here. At the end of each moot question that is raised, I would like to keep the place open for people so we can have an open discussion and discuss the moot questions that is raised. I'm starting the presentation now. Yeah. So as I said, the first topic of discussion would be brand promotion by the subsidiaries from the perspective of transfer pricing and GST. So brand promotion basically would be a transaction that is engaged by the subsidiaries wherein they use the brand of the foreign entities in India. So this would not be a transaction that is consciously undertaken by the subsidiaries. So generally they undertake all these advertising, marketing expenses in India, but they also on a parallel basis indirectly promote the brand of the subsidiary companies. I have tried to take principles across the globe and in India where the revenue authorities have either by way of a retrospective amendment to the tax laws or by way of an interpretation tried to either tax those particular transactions by way of income in the territory of India or by way of a disallowance in terms of the expenses that was incurred by the Indian territories. So I've tried to derive that principle from the income tax perspective and try to correlate to GST. So this will be the first topic of discussion. The second topic of discussion would be the intangibles in the place of supply. So in this particular concept, I tried to take the principles that were existing pre-GST era, which is either under the VAT regime or even before the VAT regime under the earlier Goods and Sales Tax Act, and how the place of supply under the current GST principle could actually be playing an important role in categorizing which state has to get the revenue and which state would actually be in the consumption state. This would be the second topic of discussion. The third topic of discussion here would be the brand name conundrum. So here I've tried to explain how the brand name that is being used by the companies, specifically in case of agricultural products, how that would have an impact under GST and how that impact under GST would be correlated by the farm laws that's going to be implemented in India. So this will be the third topic. And the last topic would be the last topic would be the franchisee services and the IP protection. So how franchisee services evolved in the service tax period and how their impact has come in the GST period and how the recent AAR decisions have actually impacted the business is one of the aspect of this presentation. Now moving on to the first aspect of this particular topic would be the brand promotion activity. So as I explained earlier in the introduction part, I would like to take you through a very the evolution of certain important principles that are required for me to correlate to the indirect tax concept. So I'll not be getting into the technical aspect or the facts of the every case, nor the entire principles that got evolved in every case, but very important principles that are actually evolved in each of the cases that is going to be discussed here. In that aspect, the first case is going to be DHL Corporation, which is a USA case. This is the first case being a pioneer in establishing how advertising marketing expenses have to be treated in income tax perspective. They evolved with this concept called as bright line test. So as per this principle, the advertising expenses that a company is incorporating, that company is incurring, wherein they are not the owner of the product, but they are merely using a licensed version of the trademarks of another foreign entity. In such case, if the expenses incurred by the entity is more than what is required for actually promoting a particular brand, in that case, there is no reimbursement that is required to be made by the foreign trademark owner is one of the principle here. The next aspect of bright line test was if the advertising expense that I have incurred for the purpose of promoting the brand of a foreign entity is more than what is required, then there would be no reimbursement. Is less than what is required, then there will be no reimbursement. So this aspect of whether AMP expenses are more than what is required or less than what is required would be taken into consideration using the comparables. So this was a pioneer case which established this concept of bright line test in the US. This principle was not exactly implemented in India, but with a slight modulation. They accepted this principle in India in the Maruti Suzuki case in the Delhi High Court, and they evolved with different principles in correlation to this bright line test. So what they, in this particular case, what happened was Maruti Suzuki, when they entered into the JV for manufacturing cars in India, Suzuki wanted their name to be piggyback to the word Maruti, and instead of M logo, they wanted to have the S logo in all the cars that is manufactured. So this embossing of trademark S and the addition of name Suzuki to Maruti, this created a lot of confusion as to how the transaction actually happened between these two parties. So naturally, the revenue authorities wanted to disallow the expenses that Maruti actually incurred because they said that you are not promoting your brand. You're already a pioneer of car manufacturers in India. You are just trying to establish the market of Suzuki in India. Therefore, Suzuki has to compensate you in terms of some reinvestment expenses for the brand promotion activity that you have done on their behalf. So this case was actually discussed, and the Delhi High Court applied this principle of bright line test and then held that if the associated enterprise uses the logo of the foreign entity discretionally, then there is no requirement to pay any compensation for the brand promotion that was done by the Indian entity. Assuming the logo that was being used by the Indian entity was way of a mandatory purpose, that is, they entered into an agreement, and on a mandatory basis, they were like, yes, you have to include the logo in any car that you manufacture, in all the letterheads that you have, in other materials that you do for marketing purposes, if it said so, then the court said that you have to come up with a concept of compensating the expenses that were actually incurred by the Indian entity. They also evolved with another incident where if the associated enterprise in India is using that logo both mandatorily and discretionary, then there is no need to compensate this AMP expenses that is incurred by the Indian entity, as long as these expenses are not too much. As in, they use comparables here in this case, and they say that unless it's too much, you don't really have to compensate the Indian territory. There were many other principles evolved, but I have handpicked a few because this is going to be relevant for correlating with the mood questions that's going to be raised. So after this Maruti Suzuki Delhi High Court judgment, despite a lot of clarity that was brought in for understanding what an international transaction is, how brand promotion activity happens, and how the AMP expenses are treated in India, there was still a lot of other questions that was left open for interpretation. Like there was no proper mechanism that was imposed as to how the valuation has to be done, how to choose the comparables and all that. So this court went up to the Supreme Court, but without discussing the merits of the case was simply remanded back to the lower authority. That further left a confusion whether Maruti Suzuki's Delhi High Court judgment in turn was practically available for the interpretation, or it was completely reversed. So since a lot of questions were open for the interpretation, they came up with they created a special bench of Delhi ITAT, and they discussed all these remaining issues in this LG Electronics case. So again, LG Electronics case came up with a very vast interpretation and understanding of how international transactions have to be. As of the many aspects that they covered, I'll cover very few important topics that is required. So they said that supposing a company, Indian subsidiary is incorporated by a foreign entity in India, they enter into an agreement, and they are transferring trademark, technical know-how, and all the other information that is required for the Indian entity to operate in India. This could be one instance. The other instance is where merely by virtue of an incorporation mechanism, without any express agreement, the Indian entity is operating without any legality the trademark of the company. So there is no express agreement that the LG in India, for example, will be promoting the brand of the LG in Korea. So when circumstances like these arise, there could be explicit agreement, there could be no explicit agreement, but the actions of the parties make it look like the parties are associated and there is a transaction that is happening between these two. So LG Electronics Delhi bench held that even if there is no express agreement between the parties, either in writing or in oral, the action of the parties would be required to would be enough to establish that there is a transaction that is happening between both the parties. So they interpreted the term international transaction and held that in this case, despite the absence of an explicit agreement saying that LG in India is promoting the brand of the parent company, they held that this transaction is a international transaction. So in this case, the LG Electronics, they came up with this concept called as economic ownership and legal ownership, wherein they said that even though I'm not the owner of the particular trademark in India, since I am going to be promoting that product in India with the logo embossed on the particular product, I would be only making my product more available to the public, and therefore I will only increase the Indian company's sales in the market. So I am deriving the economic ownership from this particular transaction that I do. Therefore, these expenses have to be disallowed, and therefore the income has to be accordingly calculated. But the court here interpreted the words economic ownership and legal ownership and very explicitly held that as far as the Indian tax laws are concerned, there cannot be a concept called as economic ownership and legal ownership, and it can only be in a commercial parlance that we can say that despite not having a legal ownership, yes, by virtue of me using it for so and so years, I can have the economic ownership of the product, or because I, reap the benefits of selling a particular product in the market with the trademark embossed on it, I get the economic ownership of it. So such a concept cannot happen under Indian tax laws. Therefore, they dismiss that contention. So these two are the very important aspects that came out of the LG Electronics case. And the last case would be the Hyundai Motors India case. A very brief facts of this case is that Hyundai Motors in Korea is the owner of the trademark Hyundai. They had given the right to use to the entity in Chennai for embossing it on the cars that is manufactured. So in this case, the authorities very uniquely found that the transaction that is happening by the Indian entity, that is the manufacturing of cars and embossing the logos in the Indian market, in a way contributed the sales that happened in India contributed maximum amount of sales for the entire Hyundai company's global turnover, and therefore Indian entity has been very instrumental in increasing the brand value of Hyundai Korea and also the share value of Hyundai Korea. So based on this, they said that Hyundai India has been impliedly providing brand promotion services for Hyundai Motors in Korea, and therefore they have to accordingly get compensated. So in this particular case, as far as my opinion is concerned, the international transaction definition was exhaustively interpreted by the ITAT, wherein the words sale, purchase, lease, or provision of service was individually taken into consideration, and the ITAC categorically told that the transaction that is happening between the Indian entity and the foreign entity neither fall within the definition of sale, nor purchase, nor lease, nor service. Therefore, it cannot be brought within the purview of international transaction. But this particular definition had a word called sale, purchase, lease, or use of intellectual property. So the court never really delved into the concept of use of intellectual property and never really discussed whether, despite me not having a sale, purchase, lease transaction, a mere usage of the product in India, because of which the brand was developed, would that tantamount to international transaction or not, was not explicitly discussed in this case. So the court eventually held that unless the transaction is affecting the profit, loss, or income of both the enterprises in totality, an international transaction cannot take place between both the parties. So, as far as the courts have currently evolved with this concept, they said that unless there is an explicit agreement wherein sale, purchase, lease, whatever is explicit, there cannot be an international transaction. So this is what has been held by the courts in the current era. So transaction under TP is being summarized here. So foreign enterprise provides the Indian subsidiary with a technical know-how and the trademark for further use. There is no consideration received from the foreign entity to the Indian company for promoting the brand by the Indian entity. How will this transaction impact the GST? So if the brand promotion exercise is undertaken by the foreign entity, undertaken by the Indian entity for the foreign company, as per the interpretations made under trademark, then whether this transaction actually falls within the definition of supply under CGST Act or not is one of the questions. So supply under CGST Act means that any transaction between one person to another for consideration, it could be sale, lease, purchase, barter, exchange, anything. And the Schedule 1 of the Schedule 1 of CGST Act says that the transactions between two related parties would be termed as a supply even if it is made free of cost. So Section 15 of the CGST Act says that if one person is having a control over the other person and puts 25% of or more shareholding in that particular company, they are related persons. So by virtue of the examples that we just saw, the foreign entity holds, it could be a wholly owned subsidiary, the Indian entity could be a wholly owned subsidiary of the foreign entity. They are giving them the right to use in India, but there is no consideration that is received by the for Indian entity for the brand promotion that is indirectly done by them in the process. So if this is considered as a supply under GST, but it is not considered as a international transaction under TP, then will it be considered as an import of service? And will there be a necessity for the Indian company to pay tax under RCM for the brand promotion that they are doing? They could be receiving the money, so that will only be a receipt of money for the services rendered. But for the transfer of IP to India, will that itself be a supply of service in India? Will that be an import of service by the entity in India? That is one of the questions. So will the Indian entity be required to pay GST to the government when the exploitation is done by Indian entity free of cost? So this is one of the more questions that I've raised here. So we can discuss this and probably move on to the next question. Next topic.
Right. So RC has taken the first moot question of this session. So if anyone wants to add or give their opinion on this particular topic, you can please come forward and tell. And then if there's anything at the end also, if you want to supplement, it could be done at the end of the talk.
I just very quickly wanted to
Yes, sir.
two issues very quickly. One on the first slide, Arasi, when you said about the AMP being more than what is necessary or less than what is necessary,
Yes,
I just wanted to understand, are there any tests laid down how to determine when this AMP is, because that becomes again open question. I
Yes.
spent 10 crores, somebody says it is more than necessary, or somebody says less than necessary, then consequences follow. So one is the test is clear, AMP is greater than what is necessary, less than what is necessary, but how to determine what is necessary? Is there any test laid down or any code?
So when the bright line test was evolved, they had discussed this, whether it is necessary or not, comparing one of the entities there. Even in Maruti Suzuki case, they had used comparables to understand how the expenses have been made by the other industries. Like for example, in that particular case, they had taken Tata Motors and Hindustan Motors into consideration. There is still an ambiguity as to how the valuation has to happen. Will the comparable itself would be enough or not? Because there could be instances where the foreign entity could be 100% subsidiary of the Indian, the Indian entity could be 100% subsidiary of the foreign entity, and the kind of nature of transactions that is undertaken for for that particular SSE could not be similarly found in other SSEs. So to locate the comparables itself could be one of the difficult exercise in this. So from my understanding of various precedents here, it was quite complicated for me to give a very blanket provision saying ABC is the method that has been evolved, and this would be the method to determine the valuation, because every case or precedent had an open-ended discussion about how to choose the comparables. Even if the comparables are chosen, the valuation, how to do it, whether the costless method will be done or not. So it was quite complicated for me to conclude in a way. So I would still leave the question open if someone could answer that.
That's fine. I just only wanted to know whether because all these cases, if it has gone to litigation, somebody must have already held that reimbursement is necessary, and therefore they were impliedly held that AMP is less than what is required, etc. Therefore, what you have to reimburse. That therefore I want to know whether some test was laid down, and I understand, of course, the test will be different for different cases or the factors.
Yes.
But yeah, even comparison of Tata Motors AMP expenses, somebody else itself, we can have hundreds of questions as why they are not comparable. Anyway, I'll leave that. And then the last one is this last slide where is the Indian subsidiary required to pay GST for exploiting IT free of cost. I looked at it in two ways. One is whenever you have a trademark, there is always a trademark user license agreement under which, for example, Hyundai must be paying 2% or 3% of some net sales, etc., of all the cars made in India. They may be paying it to that. To that extent, then of course there is an import of service. There is a right to use the trademark, which will come under service, and therefore, but we are talking about the AMP here, advertisement, marketing, promotion expenses. After having given me the right to use the trademark for which I am making payment, I, as Hyundai, may be spending a lot of money in order to promote the brand in India. Indirectly, it may promote in Hyundai in Korea also, but obviously, because they have given me a right to use the brand name, I have to promote the brand name at least within my territory. That probably I thought, even in the absence of an agreement, you may not be able to say that there is an exploitation of the intellectual property rights free of cost, etc. Cost has already been borne through the 2% or 3%. Of course, if our right to use the trademark itself is free, then there will definitely be an issue.
Yes.
But if there is an agreement for use of the trademark and a fee is fixed, then you can go into the question whether the fee is correct or not. But if the input tax is available, again, no valuation issue will arise. But if because of that right and after having paying the royalty, if I'm spending AMP expenses on my because maybe there may be no requirement for GST at this point of time. That's the only point I wanted to flag. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Arasi, we can move on to the next topic.
All right.
There are
Okay.
more questions we'll take up at the end.
Sure. Okay. So the next point of discussion would be intangibles and phase of supply. So for this, I would like to explain two cases. One is 20th century Nunscop case. This was a very old case wherein this discusses about the earlier GST goods and sales tax case. So here there was a company incorporated in Kerala, and that company had wanted to transfer the trademark to a company in Bangalore, but the agreement the agreement was executed in the state of Gujarat. So since the agreement was executed in the state of Gujarat, they had paid sales tax in Gujarat. But unfortunately, the Kerala government, the Kerala authorities wanted to tax this particular transaction in Kerala because despite the transaction happens to a party in Bangalore, the principal place of business of that particular person happens to be in the state of Kerala itself. Since the buyer and the seller both are in the state of Kerala, they wanted to make the transaction as an intrastate transaction, and therefore subject to taxation in the state of Kerala. So when this case came up for discussion, the court during those times, even the constitution did not have the amendment giving proper effect to the definition of sale, nor the CST had the specific terms wherein we could straightjackedly conclude a transaction to be an interstate sale or an intrastate sale. So on the earlier circumstances that was in place, they held that if the goods are available for transfer, then the situs of sale would be the place where the contract is executed and not where the goods are located for sale. So if I'm executing the contract in a completely different state where the parties are having no existence, but the exploitation happens in another state, then that place would be the situs of sale. So that was one of the interpretations made in this 20th Century Finance Corp case. The second interpretation was, they said in cases where the goods are not in existence, then the transaction would only be affected by actual delivery of such goods. So in such cases, the taxable event would be on the delivery of goods. So in this case, they did not envisage a transaction where a party in the state of Kerala is entering into a party in the state of Karnataka, could be exploiting this in another state. So this interstate concept, interstate transaction was not basically the basis of discussion in 20th Century Finance Corp case. So then came this Lal Products case where, assuming a similar transaction, an entity that was incorporated in the state of Kerala had wanted to transfer the trademark rights to an entity located in the state of Tamil Nadu, but the agreement was entered into in the state of Karnataka. In this case, since the Lal Products case, what happened? They differentiated the 20th Century Finance Corp case. They deviated from the norm of saying that the situs of sale is the place where the contract was executed. They deviated from that norm, and then they held that the situs of the owner of the intangible asset would be the closest approximation of the situs of the intangible asset itself. So if the owner is from the state of Kerala, then the place of supply would also be the state of Kerala. So even if the transaction is the this particular instance is only for an intrastate transaction. In the second instance, they said the entity in the state of Kerala, for example, if they want to transfer the trademark rights to an entity in Tamil Nadu, but exploitation is going to happen in another state, then in that case, as per the second interpretation, they have held that the place of supply is it's an interstate transaction that is accessible to CST. So here we have two divergent opinions, wherein 20th Century Finance Corp told that the situs of sale will be the place where the agreement is executed, and Lal Products case says that the situs of the owner is where the place where the sale has been exactly made. So considering these circumstances, I would like to take an example of a case under GST. Assuming that A is a company who is incorporated in Tamil Nadu, he wants to permanent transfer. He's selling off his trademark, so assignment. So he is transferring his trademark to a company located in Karnataka. So when this transaction happens, the Karnataka company, the B located in Karnataka, understands that there cannot be any exploitation of that particular trademark if I buy it in the state of Karnataka. For example, we can assume that the entity that is there in Karnataka is only a head office, and this entity B has a branch in Maharashtra and in the factory premises where this exploitation of trademark can actually happen. So in that case, B is insisting A to raise a bill to ship to invoice, saying bill it to B in Karnataka and ship it to B1 in Maharashtra. In such a case, by virtue of the agreement of transfer between A and B, since B is having the place of business registered in the state of Karnataka as per the Companies Act, they are by virtue of the transfer agreement itself, B's employees will also have the technical know-how and the rights to use the trademark, because they are all under the they all form a part of the agreement. So after the a sale agreement is executed between A and B, so A raises a bill to invoice on B in Karnataka, and he raises a ship to invoice on B1 in Maharashtra. If we see, as per Companies Act, B and B1 are the same persons, but as per GST, they are having distinct status, distinct entity status. So B and B1 seem to be a different people. In such a case, when A raises a bill to ship to invoice, there has to be a corresponding invoice from B to B1. If we see, as per the Schedule 2 of CGST Act, if there is a permanent transfer of IP, then it is categorized as supply of goods. In such a case, for me to understand what is the place of supply, I should go back to Section 10 of IGST Act. So Section 10 of IGST Act has three sub provisions, of which first point says that if there is a involvement of movement, there is movement involved in the goods, then the place where the goods are terminated for delivery to the recipient would be the place of supply. In this case, since it's intangible goods and there is not really any movement that is happening, I would not be able to consider the A part of the provision. If I go to the B part of the provision, it says that if the goods are delivered to a third party on the instructions of the person receiving the goods, then it means that the person who is directing it, the place of place of that particular person would be the place of supply. Again, in this particular case, there is no really movement that is happening, so I'll not be able to choose even that particular point. So, as per 10(1)(c) of the IGST Act, if there is no movement of goods, then the place where the goods are available for delivery would be the place of supply. In this instance, it would be Tamil Nadu itself. So, the transaction between A and B, as per the previous slide, happens to be a supply of goods, and location of the supplier is going to be Tamil Nadu. And as per 10(1)(c), the place of supply is also going to be Tamil Nadu. Despite exploitation of trademark happening in the state of Maharashtra, the revenue on this particular transaction goes to the state of Tamil Nadu, where no consumption of service or sale happens. So this particular transaction is basically not really fulfilling the consumption concept of GST. Now, as I explained in the previous slide, A is billing it to B and shipping it to B1, because I'm assuming that the exploitation would be happening in Maharashtra. It's really a question as to how the transaction will happen between B and B1. Will there be a supply of service between B and B1, because they cannot sell the trademark from B to B1 because you cannot sell to yourself? And will that be a temporary transfer of IP, therefore licensing, and hence it would be um, a sale of, a supply of service, or it would still be a supply of goods or not? So this will be one question. The other part of understanding is, as per Schedule 2 of CGST Act, permanent transfer of IP, in the sense transfer of title in goods, would tantamount to supply of goods, is what is the explanation given in Schedule 2. But if we go to notification number 11 of 2017 to understand the rate of service for this licensing services of IP, we understand that the words used are temporary or permanent transfer of right to use in intellectual property rights. So when I give permanent transfer of rights in IP to another person, the notification completely contradicts the stand that is taken in the Act, which says permanent supply means it is goods, if only temporary transfer, it is services. So there is a bit of contradiction in the notification and schedule as well. So this is the second question that I wanted to discuss.
Yes. So if anyone wants to,
Yeah, I think again a very interesting thing. I just
yes, sir.
compare in the slide Arasi, you have
Yes, sir.
talked about trademark and also suddenly technical know-how came. So I was a little confused why technical know-how was being. We are talking about trademark only, here.
Yes, sir. This entire presentation is only about trademarks.
Because in the one of the 2 slides earlier, you also say transfer of trademark and technical know-how. So I was a little bit confused. The technical know-how means is again totally something different.
Yes, 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 yes,
Therefore,
agreed.
we are talking about trademark only, no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the point with this particular example which you are saying, yes, permanent transfer of a trademark will be treated on par with the supply of goods, whereas a temporary transfer will be treated on par with supply of services. But just to ensure that if the rate of tax is different, then there could be play. Therefore, in the notification, the way I understood was they given the same rate of tax, whether it is supply of goods or supply of services, intellectual property, the same rate should apply so that you cannot have arbitrage between the rates. That's the purpose behind having the same rate. But you're right. If there is an assignment, which is what we call as a permanent transfer intellectual property, see that in that type of situation, there is I'm not able to contemplate a situation where there is a build to ship to model in the case of a trademark. If as in Tamil Nadu, I am wanting to transfer or assign my trademark to B because I am looking only at a legal entity called B. B1 is also part of the same legal entity, whether it is Maharashtra, I am not concerned. I am transferring it to B. Therefore, it will be like a transfer. It's a transfer of goods because it is a permanent transfer. And we are talking about 2 places. So a build to ship to type of situation may not happen because then B as a head office and the head office of the entire company holds the trademark and each entity is allowed to use. Then question is whether there is a temporary transfer of right to use the trademark by the head office to the branch office, just like what we have in the case of intercompany services, etc. Whether that would come. Generally, even if it comes, if there is input tax credit, people would not bother. Otherwise, that could probably be issued. But the situation you had contemplated of supply to assignment to B and ship to B1, I don't think that will probably really happen in future. But if you have something else in mind, I just wanted to understand that. That's
So what I tried to make here was, if that situation is not possible, then I transfer the trademark to an entity in Karnataka. So as per this 10(1)(c), it makes, even though it is an interstate transaction, isn't it making the interpretation an intrastate transaction? So even if the consumption, assuming after receiving the trademark in Karnataka, the exploitation of trademark is not happening in Karnataka. They are in turn giving it to their factory in another state, and there only exploitation happens.
Correct.
Regardless of that, isn't it becoming a CGST SGST transaction despite me entering into a transaction with the other state party?
No, there the way I am looking at it is there is a seller who is in Tamil Nadu and there is a buyer, and we are talking about the transfer as if the trademark itself intellectual moving. Therefore, to that extent, that is over. That consumption by the company B in Karnataka is taken place. Thereafter, there is another set of transaction between B and B1, etc., which happens to be a service, which will be a separate leg of transaction. So the build to ship to model, if you remove that problem, because that's unlikely to happen, A to B will be treated just like goods, as if the trademark had moved from here to there for him to exploit. Thereafter, he may in turn license it to somebody else or to his own other entities in Karnataka, in Maharashtra, or in Punjab or any other place. That is an inter-se company because of the legal fiction created in Schedule 1, distinct persons if services being rendered, etc. Some value has to be assigned and you want to take the charge, I think you can do it. That's probably how it will work.
But despite the considering trademark to be a movable property, in this particular transaction, there is no actual movement that happens between A and B.
That is always the problem with intangible.
Yes.
And that is why they overcame it that day very easily by saying where the contract was executed in the 20th century lease financing.
Yes.
But that was, as you rightly said, at a situation when nothing was contemplated. But here, in a way, we have to contemplate, even in the case of individual, by what we mean by movement is a constructive delivery. From my books of account, the trademark leaves and it goes and rests in B's Karnataka books of account. There is, therefore, in a way, the intellectual property has also moved. That is why in many of the cases, even in income tax, they always try to talk about, if you are talking about trademark, etc., its citus is stated to be along with the head office of the company where it is stated, etc.
Yeah.
You know, therefore, now the citus I was owning in Tamil Nadu, now Karnataka is owning, means the trademark itself has moved, just like goods are moving. That's how it has moved. I think that probably a natural corollary we have to take in order to resolve this particular problem.
So we would only be applying 10(1)(a) of the IGST Act to conclude that it is a movement and therefore it becomes an interstate transaction.
Why I am saying is there is nothing like B will then tell A, I'm taking an assignment, but I want you to move it to B Maharashtra. That situation would never happen in real life situation, because B1 is a part of B legal entity. So the legal entity takes over. Unlike
Yes,
physical goods where I do it, but I want it to go to some place. In here, it will go only with reference to B. There is no situation where B will say, I am buying, please deliver, because there is nothing like a delivery.
Exactly.
Property there. That's the reason. That's
Okay.
That's again my view. It may not necessarily correct. I'm just because you raised this issue, I'm just making myself. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Please go.
I'll move on with the next slide.
Arasi, just a minute. If there is anyone want to supplement more on this, because I think there is still some ambiguity in this. We have, if anyone wants to add on to this, Rajasekhar sir, Vishwanathan sir, or we can move on and take up at the end of.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So the third issue that is that's going to be discussed here is the brand name conundrum, for which I have taken a very specific case, that is Aditya Birla's case. So here I'll explain the case first. So Aditya Birla Retail Limited is taking care of the Moore store, where the agricultural products would be brought from unregistered parties and local vendors. They will do the basic activity of sorting and then do the repacking exercise in their premises. They emboss this Moore brand on the product. They also emboss this Aditya Birla Group's logo on the product. And then they also comply themselves with the various statutory obligations that is there under the Legal Metrology Act or FSSAI regulations. So what happened after the implementation of GST was they issued an exemption notification in July 2017, wherein they said agricultural products, once they are put in a unit, agricultural products primarily do not contain any GST, was the initial interpretation that was brought in. But later, after 3 months, they brought in an amendment to the notification saying that if the agricultural product like rice and pulses are put in a unit container, and if the brand name, registered brand name, is being embossed on it, then the taxation of 5% at the rate of 5% would apply that to that product. So now what happened? Once this particular amendment was introduced, first thing that happened was most of the registered brands went and deregistered themselves. So here we have two things to consider. One is what exactly constitutes a brand name. Brand name, as per the exemption notification that is provided under the notification number 12, it only explains this two words. The first word is registered brand name. The second word is only brand. So registered brand name, as per the exemption notification, says that your brand name has to be registered either under Trademark Act or the Copyright Act or such other act that is in existence. Now, instead of explaining the brand name, they simply explain what is a brand. So as per that brand definition, you can any word, logo, design, monogram, anything could be brought under the ambit of brand. So what happened in this case is Aditya Birla went to the AAR and told, I will remove the logo of Moore brand in the packaging. I'll also remove Aditya Birla's logo in the packaging. I will have nothing that is put in the packet of the agricultural products that will make people think that it is my product. So, but they said, because I have to oblige to other statutory requirements, I will put the details of my the name of my company and the customer care number and other necessary things as per different statutes. Explicit display of the brand names that I have registered under the Trademarks Act would not find a place in the packaging. So they asked the AAR if this particular exercise that was done will help them in claim the exemption of the product. They also they referred a lot of precedents under the Central Excise Act, wherein we had similar provisions saying if a particular product was bearing a registered trade name, then they were not subjected to Central Excise duty at that particular date. So the AAR and both the appellate AAR categorically differentiated every case, and they came up with a justification saying even if you remove all the trademarks from your product, you would still retain the other factors like the color of the product and sales at the more store. Since these other factors that contributes people to relate the product to your name is still existent in a transaction, they said that placing the word Aditya Birla Retail Limited in itself would be a brand name, and therefore you have to pay the GST to the government. So they also came up with a strict interpretation of an exemption notification and said that no liberal construction of the notification can happen. So if a product is bearing a registered brand name, I will not let you use the exemption that is available. So here one point that was missed discussion was, like I said, the notification did not explain what is a brand name. They explain only registered brand name and brand. So we are not very comfortable in understanding the other marks or other aspects of how a trademark can be obtained. In this case, Aditya Birla could not have gone to the trademark registry and gotten themselves the orange color of a product as their trademark under the color trademark category. Or they couldn't have got the other aspects of various options of trademark that was available to them. Merely because they said that I will write my manufacturer's name on the label, the AR went ahead and held that that is in itself a registered brand name, and therefore the exemption notification is not available. So what are the implications that happens if this strict interpretation is given? In the first instance, I would, in my opinion, the exemption notification was not interpreted strictly because bearing a registered brand name means unless Aditya Birla Retail Limited was a specific brand name that was registered under the Trademarks Act as per the definition given in the exemption notification, they cannot hold that Aditya Birla is using the brand name and therefore 5% taxes constituted. The second point here is there were precedents under the central excise regime where the courts have held that if a person does not want to emboss their trademark and they print their name merely for complying with other statutory obligations, that in itself will not be a trademark, therefore falling under the definition of the notification that is given. So it did not only the disregarded such explanations that was given. I think that there was not a very great strict interpretation that was made under this particular aspect. So what happens if these kind of exemption notifications are given a very literal understanding, and any name that I can associate it with the manufacturer's name, if it construed as a brand name, then what exactly happens is, so until this day, the brand companies or the firms, they used to procure the material from various sources. Now, with the upcoming farm law that's going to be implemented, the exposure to the farmers in the front line would be increasing. So, one thing that can happen is the big companies can take advantage over the farm laws and expose the farmers to a price at which they want to buy and impose these taxes on the cost of the product, because since they are procuring mostly from unregistered person, there will not be any input tax paid and therefore no ITC available for them to pay the output tax. So the first thing that can happen is increase the price of the product at exorbitant rates and pass it on to the customers. So one would be the exploitation of farmers in one end, then exploitation of customers on with the burden of taxes, and the third one would be increase in fake products in the market. So what really happens here is the what really happens here is the once this particular notification came into existence, all the big brands started deregistering themselves from the registry. In such cases, it really paves way for a lot of fake products in the market, and therefore it only becomes a huge, discomfort on the customers. So I think unless we have a proper mechanism to control all this, even in place of anti-profiteering that is already in existence, there cannot be nothing that can actually save the customers or the farmers with the new laws that's being implemented. So this was one of the points that I wanted to discuss. One second.
Yes, sir.
But this particular thing, subsequently, I think they have amended to say that you can disown the brand and then you say that you will not have an actionable claim, etc. In which case you will be entitled to the exemption. No, that modification was there. No,
That this case happened after that amendment only, sir.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Therefore,
Yeah.
now presently what is happening is, of course, what you guess, your company name, etc., you are not saying it's a brand name. It is statutorily required to put everything. But if there is anything in the name of a brand name, whether registered or unregistered, if you are giving up your right to sue some other person for using it wrongly, then you are entitled to the lower rate or the exemption as the case may be. That's how now it is looking up.
Yes, but what happens to the branded products who have not deregistered themselves, but they have simply chosen not to put their products brand name on the product, but they are simply continuing to put the company name because of other statutory obligations? Would that still be a branded name as per the notification and subject to tax?
It should not be, because the
Yes.
name of the company, the name of the company itself could also be a brand name. There's no
Yes.
doubt on that.
Yes.
But then that must be separately registered, or you must be suing on the basis of that. But because the Act requires, there is a statutory requirement that whoever is the manufacturer or packer or etc., his name etc. must be given. And if the name is given, that could not be considered to be a thing. And if somebody uses a similar name etc., then you are giving up your rights to sue him. So that's what. But normally, I think name, if I am producing it, therefore I am saying R Parth Saradi, etc., then that is not treated can be a brand name. That's how I think they try to solve the problem. But how many people will come, for example, because of that, but because of the brand name, the prices obviously go up, as you rightly pointed out. Whether you are talking about ITC Atta or you talk about Naga brand, now we are getting most of Maida, etc. So they do have the thing, but then they are at a disadvantage vis-a-vis other people who are without brands, and that's the reason why they brought up this compromise. That if you don't want to sue somebody for the violation, then you are also entitled to that exemption. That's how I think they have kept it.
Sir, I have only one suggestion here, sir. You would have read that Grasim Industries case of Supreme Court. Atta, sir.
Which one, sir? Which one?
Grasim Industries was a Central Excise Trichy. There, the subsidiary company used the main company's name in the cement bags. Supreme Court, under the SSI notification,
Correct.
the same definition, they said, so long as the product is with or without name is connected to a particular manufacturer, the mischief will attract.
No, that's absolutely true, sir. What you are saying with reference to under Central Excise, when you had the SSI notifications, what is the meaning of a brand name, how to argue, etc. Yes, there is a problem. Here also, when we are talking about the brand name, one, of course, you have registered, and you have a registered brand name, then of course
No issue.
you are caught. But in the registered name, you give up your right to sue somebody else, in which case you are still getting the benefit.
Here is the brand name definition they have given, where all signs, logos, anything to do with the connecting with the product with or without the name of the manufacturer or the owner. Same definition is applicable here also in the definition of brand name. So we'll have to see.
Absolutely right, sir. Vishnu sir, but only one difference I am noticing is if I put the name of Aditya Birla even as a company name, what you are saying is it indicates a connection between Aditya Birla and the goods. Therefore, in that sense, will it not be on par with a brand name as interpreted in Grasim, etc.? That is
Yes,
your
yes.
I understand that. Absolutely, you are right. But here, what we are talking about is the situation probably did not come in Grasim. Here, I cannot sell the goods when I repack it after obtaining it from an agriculturer without putting my name, because the law requires me to put my name. So I'm putting the name as required by the law, but as a result, it shows a connection. I did not want to do it because you are insisting, put the name of the manufacturer, put the name of the packer, etc. And therefore, I'm putting it. Therefore, that will not amount to a brand name within the meaning of this GST, this particular notification is the argument which goes on.
Yes, yes. I do understand that, because you are indirectly denying the benefit to the farmer. Ultimately, anybody who owns a product will brand it in his own way and sell it only. That by itself should not give a room for taxability when the intention is to exempt it to benefit the farmer. Agricultural products.
Correct, sir. Therefore, what is as far as the agriculture is concerned, his product is exempt. But
Yes.
just because, let's say, you are one purchaser from the agricultural, I am another purchaser from the agriculturist. You are not going to use a brand name. I am going to use a brand name. The money which goes to the agricultural does not change. But my selling price attracts a GST. Therefore, the ultimate consumer will decide whether I want to buy an unbranded from Vishwanathan or from branded from Parthasarathi and prepared to pay more money. That is a decision with the ultimate consumer due. But because
Yes.
I'm forced to pay the tax, I'm charging a higher price. Maybe you are able to charge, but the farmer is not affected by that, because the farmer continues to get whatever he will get, irrespective whether I'm going to have a brand name.
Exactly.
Sir, I have one doubt, sir.
Yes,
Who
sir.
is that?
To Mr. Patsadi, sir. Sir, you said ultimately the farmer is not getting affected, but don't you think because of the levy of tax on such branded products, the person who's buying from the farmer would want to negotiate his price and ultimately reduce the price with the farmer? Is the farmer not getting indirectly affected by it?
Difficult question because we don't know what are the criteria which goes into the negotiation. But generally, if you look at it, even now, if to the farmer somebody goes from the wholesale market or a commission agent and buys and gives, and somebody else goes, that is a difference. But if you are generally talking about two sets of people going and negotiating, it's like any other contract. Whatever is the negotiating power of the two sets of people. Therefore,
Yes, sir.
if I am an agriculturist and I produce 1,000 tons, and you are prepared to take my entire 1,000 tons in one go, or I have to go to Vishwanathan, APS, and 3-4 people, or 250 metric tons, so 4 people negotiation. I may also decide, okay, you are prepared to take 1,000 tons, so I'm prepared to give you a lower price, and then you are putting your brand. So there are a lot of other equations come which are impossible for us also to look at all of them. But the point which probably we can look at it, the negotiation between the agriculturist and the other person is not going to be totally influenced, because I'm going to sell it on a branded thing. Because when I sell the branded product, I'm recovering the tax from the buyer of my product and not in any case passing it on, or because of that. What you are saying is, if the other person sells at 100 and you are forced to sell at 110, therefore you will negotiate with the agriculture to reduce it to some extent. The 10 rupees cost, by a portion of it you may pass it on. Maybe it is possible in some cases, but I don't know. It's very difficult to get very complicated negotiation strategies between agriculture, because many of them may not be in a position even to negotiate. So they may be getting, that's how I think a lot of big people go and buy, But just imagine, let us not have this brand name at all. Even in that type of situation, it is not that the agriculture is going to get a fair deal in every type of situation, because that again depends on the particular supply demand at that particular point of time, and the requirement of the farmer and the other person. It's a very complicated economic interaction.
I understand, sir. I understand your point. But the thing is, as it has been said in the presentation, with the farm laws coming into the picture, the farm laws are considered to be a historic reform after the 1991 LPG reforms. So it says it is trying to open up the market for a farmer. So farmer, instead of selling it through the APC and then to the end customer through a lot of middlemen. He now has an option to directly negotiate with the private player. So in such cases, don't you think it would be aligned to the government's intention in trying to do justice to the farmer in getting his price by removing this particular thing, saying that registered trademark should be subject to GST?
It is more, they are more prone for exploitation if this particular provision is given a lot of effect to. That's what I was trying to convey. See, with the privatization here, a lot of people are now, a lot of farmers would be exposed to the private market, private players, wherein they can come, they can procure directly from the farmers. But what I try to analyze here was if the increase in taxes is one of the component in fixing the prices, then necessarily the fixing of prices at the procurement start itself would be a challenge, right? So won't that itself lead to exploitation? Won't they have a hand on fixing the price of the farmer also? Obviously, the farmer would also come in the upfront, and they'll have many players here. So the comparative analysis would be a wide spectrum of choices would be available for them. But that in itself will not, take away the right of a private player to fix the prices with the farmers also.
According to me, taxation and policy and principles are different. If a transaction comes within the purview of taxation, then that transaction will have to be looked into, not the objective and all that. It is for the government to decide. As a lawyer, we have to decide whether the subsequent supply after purchase is taxable. We don't tax the farmers. That is all the point.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, we are getting into much more difficult areas like the new farm legislation, where we have already having a lot of problems and all. That's what, whether it will turn out to be good or not, I think only time will have tell. But I don't think we can link it now to the GST and the brand name. Probably, I agree with Vishwanathan. We look at the tax portion separately, and then if the consequences happen to be unintended, like what, maybe they will have to come up with a further amendment if required, etc., to rectify the situation.
Perfectly right.
Or if Tata wants to market without tax, let them forego all their brand properties and market it as a plain product. They can't have the cake and eat it. I'm little very crude, sorry for that. We'll have to look at the law like that only.
No, I think this example of taking the farm laws into consideration has derived a lot of lot of interaction amongst us.
We are analyzing, sir, not debating. We are
Yes.
just analyzing. The scope of the presentation is limited.
Correct.
It does not go for a longer debate.
Right.
Right.
So I'll take up
Yes.
with the next.
Sorry,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
No issue.
No, sir.
Limited.
Absolutely
We can analyze. We are not debating.
Yeah, we can analyze, and it's actually it becomes a free fall batting because laws are so wide. We can
Yes,
also
sir,
do a lot
yes,
of
sir.
free batting, as we call
No,
it.
the
Exactly.
scope of presentation is limited.
So what Vishwanath
But
said is
I
right, we have to
appreciate
look at the tax
RSC
side and
Ponnala
stick it to
Speaker
tax.
raising
gives
all
the
these
idea
issues.
only.
Thank you, sir.
Good.
So there's one more
Keep it up,
topic she
keep
has
it
to
up.
finish. So Arasi, I think you can continue with your
Yeah,
talk.
I'll do that.
Yes.
Fourth one.
So this will be the last aspect in the presentation. So here I've tried to cover an AAR decision in terms of franchisee services. Yeah. So this is about T-Post Private Limited case, wherein I'll get into the very brief facts. So here they are into two type of transactions. One is they locate the premises, they build the interiors of the place, they also incur costs on the infrastructure and furnishing of the particular place, and then they identify a franchisee, and they enter into two type of agreements. One is a purchase agreement, wherein they are selling off the entire premises that they have developed for this particular franchisee, and the other is a franchisee agreement. The second type of transaction that this company does is a normal franchisee agreement, where the franchisees in turn find their space and do all the developmental activities. Now, the important fact here that is in question is, in the franchisee agreement, there is also one of the term that says that they have to, there is a license to use the trademark, brand name, and other proprietary knowledge. Here, for the purpose of franchisee agreement, there is a lump sum franchisee payment that is made by the franchisee to the franchisor, and For the license to use this trademark, there is a fixed sum of payment, either a 10% of fee, or 10% of the net sales that happens in a particular month, or a fixed percentage of a fee, either of which, whichever is higher, was collected from the franchisor, from the franchisees. Now, in this question, the AAR held that irrespective of the transaction that happens between the franchisor and the franchisee is in terms of a licensing, wherein they give the license of right to use and trademark to the franchisees, you cannot classify it under 12 percentage, but these will all be other professional and technical business services categorized under 18 percentage. So for simplicity, I have tried to ascertain those SAC codes. 997336 is one of the SAC code which talks about licensing services for the right to use trademark and franchises. The explanatory notes to the SAC code explicitly say that this service code includes licensing services for the right to use trademark and to operate franchisees. So from this we understand that the legal ownership of the trademark is only transferred for the purpose of operating the franchisees. This particular SAC is subject to tax only at the rate of 12 percentage. But the AAR has held that these services or agreement that the company has entered into will fall under this 998396 service, thereby taxable at 18 percentage. Now, the explanatory notes to this particular SAC says this service code includes original trademark and franchises, that is the legally registered ownership of a certain brand, and they very specifically exclude the licensing services for the right to use trademark and franchises. So, in my opinion, since there are two aspects to this transaction, one is the franchisee agreement, wherein lump sum franchisee payment is received. The second one is a licensing transaction, wherein transfer of IPR, temporary transfer of IPR is made for the licensing of trademarks. The 18 percentage of tax can be subjected for the lump sum payment of money that is made for the franchisee agreement. But for this licensing service, it was unjust to classify this under this trademark and franchises definition when there is a specific class that was given for licensing services. So instead of the company paying 12 percentage, they are now subjected to pay 18 percentage. So this is one point of contention that I had a difference of opinion in, and I wanted to put it to the forum for discussion.
I think Arasi, this is your last slide.
Yeah, this is my last. Yeah, so all consolidated questions can also be put up
Yes.
now.
Yes. You can stop sharing your screen. We can have the discussion.
Sure.
So participants, as we have already had a good discussion in this talk today, we can consolidate all the discussions now in the span of 10 minutes, and then we can end the session today. Swaminathan sir.
Yeah, one small question. Is there any difference in the payment made by for a brand name or a logo? Is there any difference, or it's all one and the same?
Are you asking in terms of royalty, sir?
Yeah, royalty, exactly.
Yes. Royalty is basically paid for the exploitation of all the IP rights that I actually do. So if the owner of the trademark is going to give me the right to use it in whatever in India, or he's also located in India, and it's going to be an interstate transaction, for the exploitation that I make, I'll pay the money, which is in terms of a royalty.
Yeah, but fine. Is there any difference for a brand name? There will be a different thing for a logo, which is used
There
by
is
some.
no. I don't think some differentiation can be categorized on that.
Thank you.
I think that would depend on what sort of registration you're getting for your trademark. That could either be the name registration or a device mark registration.
Yeah, but eventually it would I think he's asking on a perspective of what kind of an IP it is. Is it a copyright? Is it a trademark? Or is it a patent? He's asking on that aspect, I think.
That line of.
Yeah. I think there won't be any differentiation on that, and they would simply collect it for the exploitation that happens.
And if I may just share my thoughts on this. Generally, any trademark or any logo or brand name is procured for usage. That is usually for the entire running of the business, or for one to represent that company or that mark elsewhere. So generally speaking, most of these agreements would have the brand name, the trademark, and all of it as a package, because the representation must be multifold in order to achieve better development. So for example, I mean, if I may just take it a little further, there is something called a trade name and there's something called a brand name. Where trade name is the name in which I'd be marketing. Say for example, if there is Archie, let's take. So it's Archie, and then Malli Tool, Malaga Tool, chili powder, garam masala, everything are normal generic names of the commodity that comes under the trade name. But for example, if you're talking about brand name, it's like Parle is there, and then you have Sunfeast, you have Bourbon, you have, so these Sunfeast, Bourbon, etc. are all brand names. So Parle is like an umbrella that hosts a lot of brands. So there in cases, people might take a brand name. So then they would not, their agreement would not have the entire, logo of the trade name, etc. In the agreement. However, when I'm talking about marketing for the entire trade name as such, if I'm going to take the entire franchise of Parle and have like a Parle store or something, then I would require all the brand names and the entire logo and everything would come into existence. So it's very it's agreement based, sir. And also in most of the cases in small term brands, the logo and the trade name, everything would go hand in hand.
Like for example, if I take a McDonald's franchisee, it would mean that I take the technical know-how of how the menu has to be placed, how the seating arrangement has to be made, how the coloring inside the place has to be made, and how the preparation of burgers and other beverages are made in the premises. So I think under such agreements, franchising agreements, we will have a consortium of so many things in place, both technical know-how, trademarks, the patented knowledge as to how the processing has to be done, how packaging has to be done, and how sales has to be made, how the employees have to be trained, etc. would be taken into consideration.
Yes.
So you mean to say that the taxability never depends upon the different of the logo or the brand. If it is trademark, this will be
There was one service called sponsorship service, brand promotion service. So many different activities have been taxed, sir. Because to my understanding, trademark, only certain mark can be registered under the Trademarks Act.
Right.
You cannot register the name of the company or a name of a person and all that. They promote the logo or brand name, which is not connected to a registered trademark. That is my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, sir, what you're saying is absolutely right, because for every product, there is a different class under which a trademark is registered.
Yes.
Yes.
So it could be differentiated on that line as well. But this is, as Jayalakshmi said, like, for example, Parle is an umbrella of so many other different brand names. So it is all agreement based at the end of the day, is what.
We will ask Jayalakshmi to speak on trademarks.
Jayalakshmi can speak on it.
IPR.
Sure, definitely. And also it depends on for what am I procuring the brand, procuring the rights over the brand for a franchisee. So it mainly depends on the intent with which the said commodity, I mean the brand is purchased or the trade name is purchased.
Jayalakshmi already decided your topic. She is speaking on geographical indications. The juniors are coming with different topic. Yes.
Also based on IPR, but a very different subject that not many have dealt.
Arasi, I have a very basic question to you. Don't mistake me. I really don't know this. Your first question, you say some Korean company coming here promoting Maruti Suzuki cars with Suzuki name. What exactly is the advantage that goes to Suzuki sitting in Korea? What is the benefit out of this promotion in India?
The ultimate brand value of Suzuki increases, global sales increases, and by way of increase in sales, the turnover also increases.
How it is possible Indian consume only marketing how it will promote his international sale.
Global
In
presence.
this particular case, this was a live example of Hyundai's case. So Hyundai's share value
It is
in
all
Korea increased
specific. It is
drastically.
all specific, not to a general cases. It's
No, sir.
specific to.
Global
This is
presence
specific, yes.
increase the value.
Thank you. That
Excellent,
doubt that I had in mind, you clarified it to me.
Okay.
Excellent presentation today.
That's the excellent
Thank you so
presentation.
much, sir.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, Swaminathan sir, you may continue, please.
Yeah. No. In fact, I just want to comment on all that four. She has segmented into 4 divisions. Easily, one can understand what she wants to say. So the presentation was very easy to understand.
Borderline it very much clear with AR decisions, and she went by the decision and proposed the question of law also to be answered.
Thank you, sir.
Sir was equally has answered so many questions, and he is also enlightened with
Partha
this.
sir.
Yes, Partha sir. Yes, sir.
Special thanks to Partha sir.
Partha
Thank
sir
you so
also.
much.
In fact, he had to leave for some calls, so that's why he is not here at the end question also. But
And to answer your father's question, Pramod Chopra, Arasi means queen. Ponmalar means golden flower. Your father is there?
he is there, sir. He is in the meet, but is not next to me right now.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, AP sir.
So again, thank you.
Arasi was queen of the show. I should say Arasi was queen of the show.
Queen of the show.
Exactly, Balaji.
Thank
Exactly.
you so much, sir.
So thank you very much, Arasi. This was another very interesting topic. I mean, last few sessions which we've had, I think all these things are going to be a future big scope in litigation is what I feel, because there are so many ambiguities and there are so many questions which needs so many clarifications, and definitely courts are going to play a big part in coming to such like more clearer conclusions in all these aspects. Because every field, like for example, IP is like a growing. IP is growing everywhere now, and IP is everything for any brand whichever is coming up, like for new startups and everything. So I think this will definitely have a huge impact, and let us see how the course takes place in the future and how the courts decide on all these issues. So thank you very much for this session again today. It was a very interesting talk, and especially I would like to thank Partha sir for interacting very well in all the questions raised and answering them and enlightening it more. And others, Vishwanathan sir, APS sir, Swaminathan sir, Jayalakshmi, for all for giving their insights on this topic. So thank you very much. We will be uploading this series in our YouTube channel as well, and we'll share the link once it is available. The next session, we'll be sharing the details of the next session in the group. So thank you very much. Please stay safe and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you, sir.